Hi there, boys and girls. We are back with our book by Tom Rogers called 11, and this book is getting really good. Alex tried to return Radar, but there was no home for him to return Radar to. And as he was returning Radar, a neighbor recognized Radar and said, "Is that Radar?" And that's how we ended chapter 30. So now we're on chapter 31 of our book 11. Now let's go ahead and look at the time. The time is 3:14 p.m. Now we know the timeline of the attack on the World Trade Center, which happened earlier in the morning, and then the towers fell around 10 o'clock a.m. So this is approximately 5 hours after the towers collapsed. Now, Alex found out about it, but he hasn't told his sister. And so let's just see what takes place in this chapter, just thinking about the timeline of the date of 9/11. Here we go. A bunch of druggies used to live there. They got evicted, so they trashed this place and bolted in the middle of the night. They dumped Radar out on the street like somebody's garbage. The old man reached down and scratched Radar behind the ears, careful to avoid his bandage. Radar wagged his tail happily. Radar obviously knew the old man and liked him, so Alex breathed a little easier and figured the old man must be okay. The old man opened the gate to his yard next door and ushered them in. Then a bunch more druggies got in there and burned the whole place down, almost took my house with it. But the fire trucks got here in time. He paused at the porch step and glanced over at the empty lot. This used to be a good neighborhood. He turned sharply to Alex. "You do drugs?" Alex shook his head. The old man nodded approvingly and opened the front door. "Then come on in. I bet you kids could use a snack." Radar darted right in like he owned the place. Alex hung back. The old man looked at him curiously and then saw that Alex was staring at the man's coat pocket. "Is that—" The old man laughed and slid the shiny black object out of his pocket. "Remote control. I had the news on." The house reminded Alex of his grandmother's. Everything inside was dark green and plaid, little circles of lace draped the arms of the back of the sofa and chairs. The big oval rug in the entryway looked a little threadbare. It all felt familiar and oddly comforting. "Call me Mac," said the old man, his voice suddenly quiet and gentle. "It's short for McKnight." Who did Alex just run into? Oh my goodness, look how these stories have crossed. Mac and Alex have met. I wonder why Mac was in this story. All right, let's go ahead and continue. "Call me Mac," said the old man, his voice suddenly quiet and gentle. "It's short for McKnight." "That's Mrs. Mac on the sofa." "I'm Alex. That's my sister Nunu. Guess you already know Radar." Alex followed as Mac led them into the living room, where a tiny, stooped old lady sat in the sofa. She didn't look up as they entered. Her eyes were glued to the TV. It took Alex a minute to realize she was watching a preschool cartoon, all bright colors and bubbly, wubbly songs. Mac bent down close to her and squeezed her shoulder softly. "We got company, Dottie. This is Nunu and Alex." Dottie turned to notice them. She broke into a wide smile, then reached out to pat Nunu on the head. "Bunny!" she exclaimed, clapping her hands. Then she looked right at Alex. "Bunny," she said seriously. Her eyes were clear and green, but even Alex could tell she was no longer knew what she was seeing. Dottie turned back to the TV and bobbed her head ever so slightly as the bouncy characters launched into another song. "Have a seat," Max said. "I'll go get us a snack." Alex didn't know what else to do, so he took a seat and waited. Radar curled up at his feet. Nunu settled in between Alex and Mrs. Mac, then leaned over and whispered, "Is Grandma here?" "Huh?" "It smells like Grandma." "It smells like perfume and old socks." "Yep." It didn't take long for Nunu to get sucked into the cartoon. Radar put his head on his paws and drifted off to sleep. Alex just sat there at a loss. Where would he go next? What could he possibly do now? He needed a new deal, but he was all out of ideas. Alex heard a low voice murmuring in the next room. He slid off the end of the couch and followed the sound into the den. The voice was coming from a TV. The news was on. Alex paused in the doorway. From the side, he couldn't see the television clearly, but he wasn't sure he wanted to. but he had to. He took a deep breath and stepped through the door. To recap today's horrifying events, in what appears to be a coordinated series of attacks on major American institutions, 3 or possibly 4 commercial jets were hijacked by suspected terrorists this morning and deliberately crashed into buildings in New York and Washington. At approximately 8:45 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 out of Boston, was hijacked and intentionally flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. It struck around the 94th floor, and smoke and flames were immediately seen pouring from the building. Then, at 9:03 Eastern Time, a second 767, United Airlines Flight 175, also out of Boston, banked hard over New York Harbor and flew directly into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. It struck the south face of the building around the 80th floor, sending a fireball out the opposite side of the building. At approximately 9:40 a.m., a third plane crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. That plane, American Airlines Flight 77, left Washington Dulles this morning en route to Los Angeles, but was apparently hijacked and turned back to complete its deadly mission. A fourth flight, United 93, out of Newark and bound for San Francisco, has crashed in a rural area in western Pennsylvania. Details are unclear now, but sources tell us the plane may well have had the White House as its target. We have also received reports that the passengers on board United's Flight 93 fought back and caused the plane to crash in an uninhabited area, preventing what could have been a much bigger tragedy. Then, at about 10 o'clock this morning, the truly unthinkable came to pass, as all 110 stories of the South Tower of the World Trade Center completely collapsed, plummeting to the streets below. The North Tower continued to burn for another half hour. Then it too completely collapsed. There were believed to be hundreds or possibly even thousands of workers and an unknown number of fire, police, and rescue personnel still trapped in the 2 buildings when they went down. Both collapses sent massive clouds of dust and debris roaring through the streets of lower Manhattan. All that remains of the Twin Towers is a smoldering pile of rubble that continues to burn fiercely at this hour, hampering rescue efforts. Other buildings around the World Trade Center have also been heavily damaged by the fires and the destruction of the Twin Towers. Fire officials tell us they believe the collapse of World Trade Center 7 is imminent. The death toll from today's event is unknown at this time, but is expected to reach into the thousands. Alex heard a cough behind him. Max stood in the doorway, holding a plate of cookies. The old man dug the remote out of his pocket and muted the volume. "You didn't know?" "I knew," said Alex. "But there's knowing and then there's seeing." Seeing was 1,000 times worse. Seeing made it real. "They went down so fast," he said, his voice in a whisper. "Is it true?" "Of course it's true," Mac answered gruffly. "No, I mean, there were people still inside." Mac nodded and looked away. Alex felt weak. He sat down heavily on the couch. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "He's not coming home," Alex whispered. "What?" "My dad." Mac scowled. "You don't know that?" "Yes, I do." "No, you don't. My own son was in that North Tower, and I expect him to come walking down the street any minute." Alex shook his head. "Not my dad." "Stop it," Mac barked. "But he's not." "Don't talk like that." "But it's true. You don't understand. I was supposed to give up Radar and take him home. But now I can't because he doesn't even have a home. And if I can't take Radar home, then my dad's not coming home, and it's all my fault." Max stared at him. "You're making less sense than Dottie's son." "I told him." "Who?" "My dad." Alex took an unsteady breath. "I told him I hate you." Alex's shoulders shook as he wrapped his arms around his legs and buried his face in his knees. Mac laid a hand gently on his shoulder and let him cry. Finally, he spoke up quietly. "Son, help an old man. What's all that got to do with Radar?" Alex pulled his head up. "I already told you I made a deal. If I take Radar home, then Dad will come home." Mac nodded slowly. "You made a deal?" "I thought if I did a good thing, I could undo a bad thing." Mac chuckled. Alex scowled. "Don't laugh at me." Son, I'm only laughing because I've been doing this exact same thing all day. Mac led the way back to the kitchen and found some tissue so Alex could blow his nose. My latest deal was to stop watching the phone. I convinced myself if it wouldn't ring as long as I was staring at it. I thought if I could hold out for 5 minutes, then it would ring and it would be my son. The longest I made it was 31 seconds. What's his name? Bobby. He's an investment banker. You know what an investment banker does? Alex shook his head. Me neither. All he knows he moves money around. My dad moves people around, Alex said with a hint of pride. He drives the PATH train to Manhattan. Ooh, my son rides that train to work. My dad doesn't ride. He stands. He goes off every morning in a crisp white shirt, and every night he comes home wrinkled and pitch-stained with his sleeve rolled up. That's just like my dad. I'd like to meet your dad, and I'd like to meet your son. Bobby's our only son. A real sweet kid. Listen to me, kid. He's in his 30s, probably about your dad's age, I guess. Mac's face clouded up. He doesn't deserve. His voice made a little choked sound. Alex understood. Mac cleared his throat. He volunteers at the soup kitchen downtown. He gives blood twice a year. After his mom started to slip, he moved back into here to help me to take care of her. He even gets us tickets to the ball game a couple times a year. Yankees fan? Alex motioned at Mac's cap. He dreamed in pinstripes. You? Yep, me and my dad. They were both quiet for a while, and Mac broke the silence. He was a good boy. Alex looked sharply at Mac. He corrected him. It took a second for Mac to realize what he'd said. Then he broke into a smile. You got your dad's number? Alex held up his cell phone. Let's give him another try. Mac picked up the kitchen phone and dialed. Alex sat at the table with his cell phone and punched the speed dial for his dad. Mac put the phone to his ear, then brightened. It's ringing. Alex sat up straight. Mine too. All right, we're going to stop there. Wow, this chapter really gets me every time I read it. Okay, so now we know that Mac and Alec have met, and they both are there to try to encourage each other, to give them some hope that maybe his son or Alec's dad is still alive. All right, we'll pick up with chapter 32 next. Have a good day. Bye-bye.